Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Ayush Nawatia.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. This week we have a special guest. We have David Henner. David, you gave a talk at RailsWorld in September talking about performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we reached out because we thought, hey, it's interesting to talk about. You're on the Zendesk Ruby scaling team, so it sounds like you're working on, I guess, a non-trivial application. I don't know if it's just the traffic, but it seems like it's an involved app. So, do you want to just give, I guess, any more introduction that you want us to have, and then we can dive in and talk about how to do performance with Ruby?
Yeah, I gave that talk, and the ironic part of that, I gave almost the same talk within Zendesk, and it was originally an hour and a half, and then at Zendesk I had to break it down to 45 minutes, and then I thought I was done because I thought it was a 45-minute talk for RailsWorld. I found out it was a 30-minute talk. It's like, oh, no. So I've got a lot more content, but it was broken 30 minutes, and that's normal probably, but wow, 30 minutes, it's not much time.
It's so funny to me because I talk to people who haven't spoken at a conference or haven't, given a talk in other settings. And, so for example, at church, a lot of times, they'll have us give like a 15-minute talk on a topic, but it's like, man, 15-minute talks are hard. And they're like, what? You only have to come up with this much content. And I'm like, I always come up with an hour's worth of content and have to cut it down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's always more I could put in it. And so it's knowing what to take out more than knowing what to put in, and then turning that into a cohesive narrative. And anyway.
Having the flow is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Today it's like, oh my God, I need to have this. And the original flow is so perfect that I have actually tweaked down at my company, Zendesk, and it was like, yeah, I got this. And it wasn't until like 2 months before the conference talk when I had to submit my papers. It's like, 30 minutes. Oh no. Let's get that done. I think it turned out fairly well though, at the end of the day. I was the last talk on the last day right before Aaron Patterson talked though. And I will say that is the worst time slot to have. Like, you're worried about your talk the whole time. And first talk that I actually paid attention to, I was still kind of a little amped up. And that was Aaron's goodbye speech, basically. It's like,
right.
Dang.
Yeah.
But
so, I've been there too. I want to just dive in. So, what's kind of the low hanging fruit in the Rails performance world?
I think the big thing that people at least I don't hear people talking about, and it's like everybody focuses on, first off, a lot of people focus on really hard things. And it's like, hey, let's change it to a microservice. It's like, oh yeah, that might make it faster, but it probably is just going to hold a bunch of crud. But the big thing people don't advertise in the community is just observability and trying to actually find the things you need through, let's say, we use Datadog at Zendesk, but everybody also complains about the cost of the observability. And it's like,
right.
You can actually make your costs lower by turning on software switches. You don't need the observability 100% of the time, for example. And you can actually have tricks around the observability layer, just literally going out and okay, if we monitor something and something goes awry, turn on the observability layer, but don't turn it on all the time, because if you do, you're going to be paying half of your infrastructure infrastructure costs to Datadog. So I started the talk with that, and that was I hope a lot of people got valuable, as in dollar figures, stuff out of that. But then,
hang on, because I have a question about that.
Yep.
Because I've used Sentry, I've used Rollbar, I've used New Relic. I'm trying to think of all the different ones that I've used over the years. I mean, most of them, they sponsor the show, and so I feel like I have I have to feel good about it being a good product before I go, okay, you can sponsor the show and I can go out and say, you should try this one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've tried a whole bunch of them. But most of them, you just install the gem and then it just kind of, behind the scenes does the work. And so my question there is, how do you put a switch around that? Do you just put it into your initializer and then deploy, or how do you handle it?
In the talk, I gave the actual code, but there is a general like, hey, it's on or off, and we always have that general thing on. So there's like the general, but then let's say in the traces there you get a stack trace, and the default stack trace I believe is just one bar, nothing extraordinary, but you can actually turn a whole bunch of traces on within that trace. Break down to see everything that's going on, and then you can actually identify, this part of the code right here is slow. So by turning that on and off, like all of it on or all of it off, if you have it all on, all of it off, I don't know what our cost at Datadog would be, but I'd be willing to bet Datadog would even say, hey, stop. You're overloading us.
Right.
No, that's the big thing. Is like turning not the base layer on. It's all the other little things. They're optional.
Okay.
And then one of those optional traces are where the valuable data is, though. Like it's the stuff that you configure within your own application that gives you way more insight. It's like, hey, I want to put a trace around this certain method because I think it's slow. And then sometimes you like do that and you're like, oh, that's fast. Where's the slow part? But if you put that around enough things, and we basically in our main application, or at least the ticketing side of the application, we got the observability layer, like just it's covering almost everything. So if a certain customer starts to have slow response times, we just turn it on. We're like, we can focus on this part of the code and make that customer faster.
I gotcha. That makes sense.
But let's see, what am I doing now? Right now, I'm doing something that's not in my talk, wasn't in my talk, but is also interesting. I think if you're a big company or you're a small company, you might go, well, why is that hard? And that would be, we're changing the default scope for our main ticketing object. And the reason why we're doing that, we're adding new columns to the And it just seems like, okay, you just change the queries. Well, you change every single query. You also have to change every index from under the hood. And you have to actually never have downtime. And adding an index alone on our ticketing tables, they're just so huge. You can't just say, hey, DBAs, add this. They'll say no to you. So
you can lock that table for, I don't know, a few days.
Exactly. You can't do it. So it is a juggling act that luckily I don't have to deal with the DBA side of it. I don't know what the problems are. And essentially, when we moved from Aurora 2 to Aurora 3, it did two things. First off, it made some problems bigger. So it made this a direction we needed to go. But also, have you heard of invisible indices?
No.
So invisible indices is kind of what it sounds like. Essentially, you have an index, and a lot of times you're too scared to delete any index. Because if you delete an index, it's gone, and maybe you actually affected your application. So invisible basically says, make it invisible. It's still there. The SQL is still populating that index to make it actually work. But you can see, are there performance problems with it? So we have not deleted an index for 15 years of our application. And now we're actually able to go in and say, hey, if we actually delete these indices, we can add new ones because the memory profile won't blow up. So that is the saving grace of allowing us to actually do this whole project. Without that, we'd be too scared because, well, having things break is scary. A lot of money.
So I'm curious. I mean, I've deleted indices off of databases that I've worked on, but I haven't done it on like very large tables. I've added indices on very large tables and watched the thing go, ah. But deleting them doesn't seem to have that same effect. So is there a downside to deleting them other than just some queries that use those indices might slow down?
Right. And you don't know what, like when your application is, I think we have I'm guessing we have over 1,000 repos, for example. Zendesk. You can't figure out whether you have beat down every location where every query that actually hits this. There's actually I had to go through every query in our main API, and we separate our queries by the API queries, and we separate it by non-API queries. Let's just put it that way. And the API queries is a manageable list of things that it's like a couple hundred queries to the ticketing table that actually happens. You can actually wrap your head around that. But the non-API queries, I think it was over 40,000 different unique queries.
Oh, wow.
You go through each query and say, would this index work? Would this index work? Oh, no. So it's complex.
So what's your approach to that then?
So that luckily the things we care more about are the API queries. So we absolutely make sure that those actually are working. And the non-API queries, we're actually moving a lot of that stuff to Elasticsearch anyways. So our long-term fix is actually all those things are never actually going to need a query. So, and I don't know how the magic of that works. Like, oh, wow, you don't even need a query to get the data? That's awesome. Okay, I'm guessing somebody's looking at bin logs or something like that, and they're throwing that information right from the bin logs into SQL. But that's magic to me. So,
Ayush, do you have anything you want to jump in with?
I haven't seen your talk, so I'm probably just gonna come at you with probably some stupid questions, really. What kind of where do you normally find performance bottlenecks in apps you see? Because I know you're primarily you're working for Zendesk, so you've probably worked on that product for quite a while. But I'm a freelancer, so I look at a lot of code bases, and what I see, and it's all Rails. And what I see most of the time is people just haven't thought through the database design properly, and they're doing all these funky joins, or even worse, getting stuff out of the database and doing things in memory that you could quite easily do in the database. And it's quite common mistakes like that is where I usually find performance bottlenecks. What's your experience in that regard?
So the worst areas are where they add funky joins, because sometimes you can't solve those very easily. The talk was actually more focused on the coding aspect, like just simple things that people do that they should know about that they just don't do. So, for example, just memoization and little different memoization techniques. And one of the cool things I brought up at Zendesk that we do is we have it's kind of like a singleton, but it's not. So our account object, if you get an account, it doesn't matter how you get that account. In the request cycle, you only need one account object. So if you call tickets.account, or if you call user.account, or if you call just get me the account through this method called fetch account that we have, any way you get the account, it is the same exact object. So one of the cool things you can do based on that, so if you get the same object, if you memorize whatever you're trying to memorize based on that one object, you can, instead of actually have a request where, hey, listen, I'm going to memorize it on this object, but then someplace else in the application, you want to use that, but you can't get to that original object. We can actually memorize it on this God object. And wherever we call that method again, it is memoized. So that was, I thought, a really cool way of actually going about memoizing something, is having that God object. And then you don't have to worry about, okay, in the presenter, we're calling it this way. In the controller, we're calling it this way. And in the models, we're calling it this way. But we cannot tie those spaghetti pieces of code together. But because we have that God object, we can memorize it in one place and always access the same data throughout, and then never have to worry about. That was a cool thing that that was in the talk. But really,
what are you using for that? Are you using current attributes or something else?
as far as making it a God object,
Yeah.
I wish I knew. That was well before I came into. Okay. But I think we created a method called fetch account, and whenever we call fetch account outside, and then in probably active record, we override the account method in active record. Not even every one of our models has an account method, so I'm guessing we override that and just memoize the account in an instant variable, and it always goes back to that instant. That's just a guess. I've not actually looked at that code because I haven't needed to, and I was actually asked that at RailsWorld. I should actually really get into it, but the person who knows that best just left Zendesk, so I'll have to dive into code instead of ask questions.
Yeah, I thought the current attributes are probably a bit too new. It's only came in like Rails 5 or Rails 6 or something like that.
We just upgraded to did we hit Rails 8 yet? Rails 7. Either way, like it's so good to be closer to the edge. We're definitely on Rails 7 for main application. Oh, we were on Rails 4 for like 6 years or something like that. It was just so good to be closer to the edge.
Yeah, I've experienced that too for a long time. I was working on like Rails 4 or 5 apps, and yeah, the last year or so I've been able to work on Rails 7 and Rails 8 apps now. And what's fun is you get to go back now and figure out all the stuff that's been added in since. So, I got into like Stimulus and Turbo, and then figured out that, oh, look, Turbo actually will work through your action cable channels. And so you can push updates when you have sort of out of band. Anyway, it's just all this stuff that it's like, okay, I don't now need a full cycle to get these features to work.
So being at a bigger company, and we started on Rails 1 or something like that.
Yeah.
Upgrading through, there's obviously monkey patches like throughout the years because, at the time, Rails didn't have certain things, and now they do. And now taking those monkey patches away is hard, which also means that really adding the newest features of Rails is hard. In fact, almost impossible. But what we can do is for example, this week we upgraded to Rails 3.3, and all of a sudden the performance got a lot better. But also, let's say in Ruby
3.3, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, Ruby 3.3. Sorry, Rails 3.3. Yeah.
I do remember upgrading to Rails 3.3 back in the day, but
I remember upgrading to Rails 3 from 2. That was hard.
But that was brutal.
That was brutal.
That was the MERB merge, wasn't it?
Yes.
3 It was.
Yep. Yeah.
Anybody who was around that point remembers it was the MERB.
It was long before my time. I don't have those scars.
Oh,
yeah. Yehuda did a ton of work on that. Yeah, it was brutal.
But where was I going with this? Oh, I forgot my train of thought.
You upgraded to Ruby 3.
Upgraded Ruby 3. I don't think I'm going to remember what I was thinking about. And for example, with Ruby 3, we had in our application, we were very scared because we had and still do allow customers to add their own regexes. Well, if you add your own regex, you can really slow down and stop you can just kill an application if you allow the end users. So we had some weird way of actually making it so they couldn't just kill our system. But it spun up a process, and that spinning up a process took about a half second to a second, let's just say, to actually spin up. So it would run, and it would make sure that regex would never actually just be infinitely running. It would time it out at a certain point. But doing that was, added a half second every request, for example. But Ruby 3 allows you to actually, by default, have a timeout in your regexes. So now we spin that extra process up. So now if you're most cases, you're just running a regex that takes a millisecond or two. Those other cases that actually do timeout, those do timeout just by default. With Ruby, we didn't have to actually do this weird fancy trick to actually make it happen. So that was actually a very, very big upgrade for us because we've had those regexes, allowed people to put regexes in forever, and we've had to protect against it forever, and that's just bad. I think I would have, if I was around way back then, I probably was like, no, don't let them put their own regexes and give them an array of things that they can do. Don't give them an infinite array.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, 90% of our upgrades is just looking at code that's old, and people don't, when an application is as big as it is, people cannot wrap their head around the whole ticket save request, the cycle, because we have everything gets into the ticket. There's triggers. There's not just every layer, and essentially people can't wrap their head around that. So once you put traces around this, you find blatant, like obvious mistakes, and you just tackle them one at a time. And most of the time, it's simple coding mistakes. It's not even a mistake. It was, I got to get this feature out fast. People don't think about performance when you have to get it out within a week.
Right.
But it's been good, actually. Like the amount that we've saved in the ticket cycle, and just not even ticket. Now we're actually, since we did such a good job, we've been given more and more freedom to actually work in random areas of the code, and just the amount of improvements that we've made. Just, you don't think of little coding things like, for example, scopes versus conditional associations. Like a scope, every time you call a scope, Rails makes the query. If you have a conditional association, it makes a query, and Rails by default has that query cached up. Just making that switch will reduce the number of queries, and sometimes those queries aren't very free. So all of a sudden, you've just saved time there. So many N+1 queries where that.
So were you advocating for scopes or for
both?
Conditional.
Most of the time, conditional queries, when you're trying to like tweak the last bit of performance, I would be advocating for conditional associations.
Okay.
Scopes are not evil. It's just sometimes people don't realize, I'm using this in the scope within a loop, for example. And all of a sudden I'm getting like just query after query after query, where if you don't put it in a loop, and if you use a conditional association, that loop makes one query and you're done.
Right. So it automatically eliminates the N+1 query is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, yes, but N+1 queries, I always think of N+1 queries as the things that you can add just includes in, and it just goes away. And
yeah, generally.
Yeah, but this is an N+1 query that generates itself a different way.
Yeah.
So if I was to do if I've just built like a new feature and I just want to reassure myself that I haven't made any stupid performance mistakes or anything like that, because again, with the work I do, it tends to performance doesn't really come into it because I tend to work with startups and stuff. How do I just go about even testing certain things in my local dev environment in terms of what do I put in my Ruby code to check how long stuff is taking? I don't even know that. That's how stupid this question is. It's going right back to the basics.
We have this debate all the time internally, because essentially the only way to find out is to have our huge customers. I won't name the customers, but we have a few huge whale customers, and you put it on theirs, and you're going to find the problem very quickly. But then there's also the aspect of a new feature, even when you deploy it, looks great because nobody's using it.
Right.
And then 2 years later, somebody uses it in a way that you don't anticipate. Reactive development isn't terrible, I would say. At the end of the day, your objective when you first get out is, if you write the code clean, you can clean it up later. If you don't write the code clean, cleaning it up later is almost impossible. So I would say for feature developers, focus on keeping it clean, because once it's clean and it's very easy to read, somebody else can maintain it later. And I would say that that's the case for like any small startup. Just focus on clean and a lot of different just review code and actually have an old job I had. There's a guy, he hated me. He loved me, but he hated me because I would always review code and I would be like a stickler on making it really easy to read and maintainable and stuff like that. He hated me. And then he eventually left that company and I left that company, and I was talking to old people and I've heard him say, I miss Dave. Oh my God, I hated when he reviewed our code, but now I'm at a company that doesn't review code, and the crap that comes in here, we can't maintain it.
Yeah.
Maintainability is 90% of getting your speed out of it. Because if it's easy to maintain, it's easy. You don't want to add the best trick for speed day one anyways. Because if the code is never used, who cares? If it runs if it runs a few milliseconds slower, who cares? You care about the features that all of a sudden get like traction to make performance improvements. And hence a team like mine is probably always required at big companies, because eventually you get big enough where all of a sudden, hey, 10 years ago, people weren't paying attention to performance, and now it needs to, needs to be focused on.
Well, to your point on this, so we're actually running into performance issues on this application that I'm working on now for a client. And what it does is it does this gigantic calculation across a whole bunch of transactions on a hedge fund. And the people that wrote it, I mean, it's impossible to read. Mm-hmm. And so, you're trying to just parse through it and go, okay, what is it doing? And it's super hard, right? But the thing is that it's in a sidekick job, so it gets kicked off and it runs, and if it's a large fund, it can run 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and I'm looking at it, and what we had the conversation where we're saying, well, it'd be really nice to break this up, right, so that you can parallelize some of the work because you have multiple workers, and so that would make it faster. And just getting to the point where we can actually figure out where to break it apart has been it's been ugly. And, if it had been written in just a maintainable way, like you're talking about, where it's like, okay, I see where this kind of breaks down and, where it kind of goes into these methods and comes back out, it'd be way easier to do, because it's like, okay, we can turn these things into these things, and we can do these things over here. We can put these safeguards in place to make sure that it's not changing anything it shouldn't. But yeah, it's going to be a major overhaul, but it's like the core of the app. And so it's something that we're going to have to do. And so it's just been interesting to sit there and think about, okay, yeah, if this had been written in a maintainable, readable, understandable manner, right? We're not even talking about how it executes or how fast it is in any other way. Mm-hmm. It would have made the fixes that we have to make to it now so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And 90% of the problem is that since it's all in one job, it does everything serially, right? It does the whole process in one run without outsourcing any of the work.
Yep. Everybody's ran into that application where they have a 26,000 line file, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
What?
I don't think this one's 26,000, but it's a few thousand at least.
I'm thinking about a very specific contract I had a long time ago.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh God, one of my coworkers worked at that job too. So if he listens to this, which I'm sure he will, he'll get a good laugh out of my comment right there.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, yeah, when we talk about performance, we don't often talk about clean code, maintainability, and those kinds of things, because we're just talking about, yeah, what are the tweaks we can make. And then when we get into it, this is the other thing that I'm kind of pulling out of what you've been talking about, is that a lot of times the things that we're doing are not just simple fixes, right? Because, N+1 queries, it's like, okay, drop it includes on it, right? Yep. You want to make your query faster, add an index, right? And most of the time, those simple fixes will get you a long way. But you get too far down the line, and all of a sudden I have to restructure this to run a different way, or it's not going to in order to speed it up, or there's going to be some massive infrastructure changes in order to make this faster, or I have to change the way I'm doing caching or something like that, where it's not just this straightforward, oh, okay, here's a shortcut, you got some speed out of it. And there are those, I'm not saying they're not, but at a certain point you get to that place where it's like, okay, all the quick fixes on this are done, and it's still not good enough. So now what? And if your code is maintainable, if you can approach it and understand it and know how to change it, it makes that job a lot easier. But it's also interesting because I've worked contracts where it's like, I'm not going to pay you to write tests, and I'm not going to pay you to refactor, and I'm not going to pay you to write. And I'm looking at them and going, you realize that I'm going to be faster for the first month. And then after that, I'm going to have to refactor or write tests in order to understand
what the hell,
what this even does, so that I can make it do what you want or change what it does.
Oh yeah. Without tests, I wouldn't be able to do any of my work.
Right.
That is the key. And we don't have perfect tests. Nobody probably does.
No.
But we have enough tests where all of a sudden you change something and you can have relative confidence. And I think that is another thing about performance work, that you can't be afraid to change things and break it, which means you need to have software switches everywhere. Where you're turning it on and you're seeing if you broke. We've had extremely good luck within my group of turning these switches on and not breaking things. But if without those switches and without the monitors that you set up, you can't change anything because of fear. Fear-driven development. It's like what I was talking about before. It's like if you don't have the indices that we took away, we didn't take it away because we were scared. And was that before the show started, or during the show that I talked about the indices? Forget. Anyways,
I don't remember.
Yeah. Anyways, So anyways, fear-driven development will slow down performance too, because you don't, as you just said, you don't have tests. You're too scared to make any changes. You're like, I think it will work, and I don't know. My first couple jobs didn't have any tests, and then ever since then. I've had several jobs where I came in and was like, no, we're writing tests. No, I don't care. No, we're not. No. We're writing tests. And people are like, but how? It's like, well, let's learn.
Yeah. Well, that's the other piece on the thing that I'm working on is there aren't tests. And so it's this mission critical thing that does all the valuations for all of the hedge funds and all of your customers.
God.
And yeah, I mean, I was just like, you want us to refactor this, but but then I'm going, putting a test on this it's ugly.
Yeah,
it is so ugly. But the flip side is that making it testable, right? Writing the test will force us to refactor some of it.
And when you wrote code without tests, typically methods all of a sudden go from, I like to keep my methods within 5 lines of code in Ruby. In Java, I'm sure it'd be different, but 5 lines of code. Now, that's not a rule, but you try to keep them small. Whereas if somebody wrote the original code without tests, usually they have 100, let's just say 100-line methods are not uncommon. Trying to test a 100-line method is like,
right.
There's too many conditions. There's 7 ifs here. What do I do?
Yeah. I've heard that. I've heard that rule. I've heard that rule all the way up to 10 lines of code. Some people are a little bit more rigid on it than others. My rule of thumb is if I'm talking to somebody and I'm explaining how something works, and I try and everything that kind of happens at the same level, at the top level, right? It retrieves the, or maybe not even that, right? That might be part of a lower step. But usually it makes sure that these conditions are met, right? And then if the conditions are right, then it makes sure that it locks the table, right, and does this other stuff in a transaction, right? And so there's this step, right? Maybe the transaction's an implementation deal further down. But if I can say, these are the 5 steps to do a thing, right? And they're all mostly at the same conceptual level, then that's what my method should look like. And then underneath that, it's like, okay, how do I do this stage of the thing, right? And again, at the conceptual level. And so once you start getting lower into the code, when I've written it, what you wind up seeing is the bottom levels of the methods, they'll have some things that look like their implementation, right? Where it's like, I'm actually doing the query, and then maybe and then call this to do the rest of the work, because I feel like the retrieval and the work are at the same level. But, and then at the very bottom, it's just logic. And just being able to approach that and say, okay, I see what the process is. Okay, I see what the process for this part of the process is. That's how I like to approach it. So sometimes I wind up with a 20 or 30 line method.
We all do.
But at the end of the day, I'm looking at it and going, I understand. I can look at this and know what it does.
I think if you can't look at the method name and understand what a piece of it does, it's time to create another method name.
Yeah. Well, that's another one. When I first got started, I kind of had this ethos from Rails where it was like, they have convenient methods called like find or, update or things like that. And I was like, okay, so I've got to come up with this short, concise name. Nowadays it's like updates the thing on the thing. Because then you look at it and you're like, oh, I know what this does.
I'll just make a guess on how many methods there are that we've created just on our ticket object. And it's got to be at least 500. I don't know whether that's 500 or 1,000. You can't create little things, little update methods and know what the hell it's doing. You need a big one.
It's also interesting because you're working on an application that mostly focuses around the ticket. And so everything touches this one core piece.
Absolutely. And we created several teams around it. Right.
I've worked on other projects that didn't have that, but then they had like this core 2 or 3 objects that were the same thing. I've almost never seen an app where, everything's spread across everything. The only exception I can really think of is the way that Top End Devs is put together, but that's because I deliver several different types of media. And so those kind of get between those and like the membership and role management, it kind of gets spread across all of that because it's, do you have access to it? And then how do you deliver it? And so, I get a wide swath of things that people are going to be generally touching. But yeah, I mean, even within their little areas, right? It's podcast episodes have a ton of stuff on them, right? Course lessons have a ton of stuff on them. And it's for that same reason, right? Because within that little focused area, I've got that core piece. And so understanding that and then recognizing, okay, so I've got to optimize and make it as easy to understand as possible around this thing.
There's someday somebody else is going to maintain it and going to be cursing your.
That's right. But I'm the boss, so they'll have to curse it quietly.
Granted, I worked at a company that will go nameless that before I got there, there's another developer that will name this also. And they didn't have everything was mixture between tabs and white space. There's always extra white space at the end. Nobody actually had any cleanup around that. So I went and created a script, basically made it so everything spaces and there's no extra white space at the end of every method. So you do a git blame in that. And everybody thought I wrote terrible code. I'm like, no, this is not my code.
Right.
I don't know what it is. But git blame lies.
Yeah.
We've all...
Yeah, I want to bring it back to performance a little bit. I think we've kind of hit the maintainability idea pretty hard. And I think it's a critical piece to this, right? Because you're going to suffer trying to make performance happen with poorly maintained or hard to maintain code. But when you were talking about observability, I want to go back to that idea. Like, what are you actually looking for? Are you looking for kind of like New Relic, for example, will break it down and say you spent this much time on your query and this much time rendering the view and this much time working in the controller and this much time doing these other things. Is that what you're looking at when you see something slow, or are you looking at some other breakdown or some other numbers, or how do you approach something like that?
Before we started this team, it was just basically, this is how long the presenter's taken, this is how long the controller's taken, and various little methods throughout saying, say maybe validations. When we started this team, our first objective was, hey, listen, we need observability everywhere. So almost, I'm not going to say every method, but every validator, for example, is wrapped in a Datadog, optional Datadog tag where you can actually show.
Oh, really?
So literally not every method, but a significant portion of the methods are actually showing, you can see, and you can narrow down exactly in the code very fast, because all of a sudden it's like you turn it on and you're like, there it is. It's right there. And you might have like, okay, it's within this section and there's 3 things going on here, one of these 3. And there's sometimes what happens is a lot of times it's one of the 3. We have the option of trying to figure out where in the code the slow part is, or we have the option of just deploying more code that will tell us exactly where it is. And we've gotten to the point where there is some empty gaps, especially with the new features. When people add new features, they're not thinking about adding traces and stuff like that. But we can just really just go down and target exactly the method that we're looking for. And we've had things like, you look at the code and you're like, oh, that looks fine, but you don't see a loop. And then way over here, there's another loop, but that's in there. And then way over here, there's another loop, and that's in there too. So you got, I think they call that n cubed or whatnot. And it's like, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, obviously we need to do something with this. And then you add some, for that specific one, I just added some memoization, where all of a sudden this last loop was just literally just, it wasn't even a loop anymore. It was just calling into a hash table lookup, and it was just a bam. So all of a sudden that it turned into an n cubed, which is still not good, but the performance of n cubed versus n squared or whatever is huge. So, we got a big enough performance gain there where all of a sudden I could run away from that problem.
kick it down the road a little bit.
Oh my God. Some of the times you see the code and you're like, and it's business decisions that people make too. They make business decisions like, yeah, I can see why the developer wrote it like this, but why didn't the developer tell you no? Like, no, we can't do that. It's going to not perform in 5 years.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't know, though.
At the end of the day, the one thing that I didn't talk about today or on my talk that I think is really important is when you first create an application and you deploy it, you can always set tight limits and the amount of data that you have. So product limits is limits where you say, hey, listen, you can only have 10 options in your dropdown. That's obviously an exaggeration, but say you're allowed to put any 10, but you only get 10. You can always give more and eventually say, oh, I'll give you more, I'll give you more, I'll give you more. But going from, hey, you get unlimited, I remember the first thing I worked at Zendesk was you can have unlimited brands. Well, now the limit is 300 because we realized that unlimited brands means almost, unlimited complexity. And you can't give 100,000 brands because all of a sudden that's 100,000 domains. And that's the complexity around that is just too big. So, adding limits to your product. And as a developer, I think that's our responsibility to tell the product people that. There's areas in the code you go, if we have 100 million of these, what's the performance? It's sometimes very obvious, like, we wouldn't be able to have 100,000 of these. Right. When you're first developing a product, go back to your product manager and say, hey, that feature, if somebody actually uses it and uses it a lot, it's not going to work. And they might come back and say, nobody would ever do that. It's like, so what's the problem with actually having a limit if nobody's ever going to run into it? So I think that's also very key. And that's not programming per se, but I think 90% or a huge percentage of our job as a programmer is to go back to the product managers and telling them, hey, listen, in 3 years from now, we wouldn't want a drop down. We had drop downs, for example, that had over 100,000 options in them.
Oh, wow.
First off, the UI isn't very good, but just loading them up. And for example, for this one, this one was cool, and it wasn't an actual talk, because one of the things that we did, well, that customer that had 100,000 options, they churned because, well, we were too slow for them.
Right.
But we probably would be able to support maybe even 100,000 in the options now, because what we did is we changed our queries. And our original queries was grabbing 100,000 active record objects. And you can't have 100,000 active record objects without a serious time penalty.
Right.
But what we do now is we pluck for the data. So we get the data fields that we need. And we only need like 2 or 3 fields out of the records. So you're not initializing 100,000 active record objects. So you grab 100,000 options in an array, and then you populate it via the array /hash that you get back.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this is very fast now. And all of a sudden, that customer that had 100,000 options that churned 5-6 years ago, we might be able to maintain them now, but they're not coming back.
Right.
And that's another reason why you have a performance team. Is all of a sudden, once you start having enough churn, people are like, "Oh, customers are leaving because of performance."
Yep.
Do you have any opinions around using things like Fibers or Falcon in front of Rails to improve performance? Do you have any experience with that?
I wish I did. No. Yeah, that's as good of the answer as I can give you. I have not used Fibers at all. So
yeah, I just started a new side project and I put Falcon in, not because it's a performance intensive project. It's just a side project that lets me play around with new stuff with no risk. I was like, why not? It'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
I did that I worked for the UFC one time, and the UFC thought they were going to get a lot of different, but they thought day one it was going to be bam. It was just an e-commerce store too, so it's not going to get that much traffic. But UFC's like, but we're UFC. It's like, yeah, but like it's still like only a very small part. Anyways, I remember I was able to play in that, and it's like, hey, I'm just going to tweak every part of this e-commerce app so you can go as fast as possible. I think they launched and had almost no traffic, but it was fast for the no traffic.
Yeah. One thing that I'm running into with top end devs is the search takes like 5 seconds to run.
So search is a very completely different team for us.
Okay.
But for us, it's the exact opposite. So our search team is better than MySQL. Like whatever they're doing, they've made it index things quite fast. So what we have done, there's APIs that sometimes they need it to be like, no, you need the most current data, so we're going after SQL. But there's APIs where it's like, hey, if it's delayed by 200 milliseconds, is it that big of a deal that we don't return all the tickets? We minus all the tickets except for the one last one that they put in.
Right.
And in those cases, we've found the performance of Elasticsearch is so much faster. Like we'll get our response times. Our response times will just drop in half, for example.
Yeah, that's the thing that I've been looking at lately is I put in PG search, and it's just, doing a multi-search across all the models. I mean, it will give you back a result, but I had to tell the proxy server that sits in front of it, Kamal proxy, not to time out so fast in order to get those results. And yeah, I've been looking at possibly moving to Elasticsearch because I hear it's really just stinking fast. I was using another search engine, Mealy Search, but the problem I had there was that I could only search one type of object at a time. And so I had to go and say, okay, give me all the episodes, give me all the podcasts. And it was fairly fast, but I hated making 6 queries to it to get all the different things, because I kind of want just the most relevant thing to show up first. And so, yeah, that's where I'm looking at Elasticsearch, because I think Elasticsearch doesn't make you do that. So,
yeah, we have a different team that maintains that. So it's another place where I just use Elasticsearch, and I know it's fast in our system, but we have that's the thing about being at a big company. There's areas where you know how to use it within your company, but to set it up or anything to be an expert on it, it's like, no.
Yeah.
That's where I miss the being a startup. You get to be an expert, or at least you get to play with more tools.
Right. So are there any other big secrets that you want to share with us, or thoughts before we head into picks?
Nothing that's coming into mind, but I mean, as I said, we have. I'm creating a whole new talk. For example, I think I told you before we started. It's like how GraphQL is going to be speed up a whole bunch of things for us, and then just there's so many different areas that I was not able to hit that now I'm going to. I'm submitting talks right now to actually talk about those, but those are not well thought out in my brain yet, so I don't think I should be talking about it right now.
Yeah, you mentioned GraphQL, and I have to say my experience implementing things in GraphQL has been not my favorite thing that I've ever done. But you're talking about a performance aspect of it. I'm a little curious what you're looking at there. I know that with GraphQL, the thing that people tend to like is that you make one query and you get all the data you need in one go. So is that where the speed up comes from, or is it something else?
No. So we don't use Ruby every place. In our GraphQL endpoints, we use Java. And we're actually only using them internally. We're not using them externally yet. But internally, it hits our Java server. Java does an amazing job of parallelizing things. So then Java makes like 50, well, not 10 probably, but let's say 50 different REST requests to our main application, gets them all back way faster than if it was compiling it all. And then that comes back to the Java app. The Java app knows how to configure and put it all in the way it's supposed to put it back, and then serializes it and sends it back to the requester of the actual application.
Okay.
And because of the parallelization of that, it's so much faster. Because REST requests, right now in our application, we have something we call internally as side loads, where you can basically say, I want anything I want. It's almost like a poor man's GraphQL. Well, if all of a sudden you're doing that serially, it's just the response time is just huge. Yeah. So GraphQL is speeding us up because it's basically forcing us to come back to true RESTful responses that are really fast.
All right. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Before we get to those, if people want to follow you online, where do they find you?
I think GitHub or LinkedIn is where you'd find me. Like DR Henner is usually what you find me at. If you look for DR Henner, GitHub or DR Henner, I think get LinkedIn, even DR Henner in my Gmail would work too.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Ayush, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, hang on 1 second. I have broken prod for my client, which is always fun. I'm on Slack saying, I'm on it. Give me 5 minutes. I'm on it. Yeah, perfect timing, isn't it? I shouldn't have merged up. I merged a pull request just before coming onto this call. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, so Ayush, when he got real quiet over there, that's what was going on. He's like,
yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, picks. I'm going to start with a very selfish pick, which is I just relaunched one of my side projects called scattergun.email, which has been in hibernation for like 2.5 years because of the joys of sales tax and EU VAT. I was using Stripe for payments, and then my accountant was like, "Yeah, you can't do that because you'll have to collect VAT for everyone in the EU." And I'm like, "Okay, thanks for telling me that now." So I moved payments over to Paddle, which took a lot longer because I got distracted by other stuff. But it's back now. So scattergun.email, I just relaunched it last Tuesday. So that's one pick. The other, I usually do like a music or a TV show pick. So I'll go with a TV show this time. Severance on Apple TV season 2 just started. It's weird, and I like it. I like it very much. It's been a very strong start, I think. It was quite a cliffhanger ending in season 1, and the show started off really strong. So if you haven't watched it, I'd recommend that.
Just getting the links here for that. I've got a couple of picks I'm going to put out there. So as most of you probably know, I tend to do the board game picks as part of my picks. So I'm going to put out a game. It's called Cascadero. And it's got some elements that are similar to other board games that I've played. So there's kind of there's a track that you advance up and you get rewards for hitting certain milestones. And you also get points for hitting certain milestones. The way that you advance up the track is so there's a kingdom and the king has died. And so you're out there, connecting the cities and things like that and spreading the word on the new king or whatever. And so you put little horsemen down on the board around these towns, and you're connecting up the towns, and you get bonus points for, say, connecting 2 towns of the same color. So the first time you do that for any given color, there are 5 colors, then you get points. You advance up the board. If you are the first person to that city, and it's not the first horseman that you've put down in that group, then you get 1 point. And if you're the second, third, fourth, I guess you can do fourth, because other people can connect onto it as well, right? But it's per group. So when you connect a group to a city and you're the second or third or fourth person, you move your thing up the advanced track, or advance it up the track of that color 2 spaces instead of 1. And then if there's a herald on the city, then you add 1 to whatever you get to advance it. And then there's a bonus for having connected 2 cities of all 5 colors, with any, across any of or all of your groups. And then there are also point bonuses for getting all 5 of your markers past the first. It's kind of a finish line. 3 on the second finish line, or being the first person to get 1 all the way to the end of one of the lines. And the way that you win is you have the most points of the people that get their piece all the way to the end of whatever color they're playing. So when I was playing as red, and so I made sure I got my piece all the way to the end of red, and then I tried to get it all the way to the end of yellow as well, but I didn't have to do that. And then one of the other guys that I was playing with got his all the way to the end of blue, which was the color he was playing, but he did that on his last turn. And if he hadn't gotten it there, even though he had more points than I did, because I got mine to the end of the track, I won. And so what your goal is you want to be the person who gets it all the way to the end and has the most points. But the way you end the game is by getting more than 50 points. As soon as somebody crosses that 50-point threshold, all the other players get 1 more turn, and then it ends. Or when somebody runs out of horsemen and can't place another horseman, that's the other way it ends. And that's the way it ended for us, because we had never played it before. And so we weren't racking up the points the way that we should have been. But anyway, it was pretty fun. And then like I said, there are different rewards up the track that, so you can advance another marker up the track, or you can place another horseman, or you can move a horseman, or just stuff like that. So anyway, it was pretty fun. Cascadero, it came out in 2024, so it's a relatively new game, and Board Game Geek gives it a weight of 2.53. which means that if you're kind of a casual player, this might be a little bit complicated, but not so complicated that you're not going to enjoy it. I have to say that the complicated part is just keeping track of what you've connected with your groups, and then keeping track of how to move stuff up the track. And you get used to that in the first 10 minutes or so. And then I would probably weight it, once you understand those two things, at like 1.9. I mean, it's just those couple of concepts you have to get used to, and then you're good to go. It took us there were 3 of us playing. It took us 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And that was with us learning the game. So I would assume that it probably takes, if you have 4 or 5 people playing, it'll take you 45 minutes. So anyway, it was fun. Definitely enjoyed it. One of my buddies is teaching the hot games at SaltCon in March, which is the big board game convention up in Layton, Utah. And anyway, so that was one of the games he had to learn. We'll probably pick up another one later. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to pick that. My wife and I, for TV shows, we just started watching season 2 of The Night Agent. And we enjoyed the first season a lot. So I'll pick that as well. Let me see if I can get a link for that. And then I am starting to put together meetups and stuff for Ruby Geniuses. So if you go to rubygeniuses.com, so it took me a little longer to get it launched than I wanted to. And the reason essentially is that the stuff that I'm doing for top end devs, as far as like delivering courses and podcasts and stuff like that, I've been talking to other people who want to use the system I'm using. And so rather than do the smart thing and just deploy them a copy, I made it a multi-tenant app so I can charge them for it. So that took a bit of work to kind of get everything figured out and learn how to do multi-tenancy with Stripe Connect on my app, and make sure I'm getting all the right webhooks and all that stuff. But it's basically done. So if you want to go sign up, I'm going to change the price today. I'm going to move it down to $47, just because I'm still pretty happy about the inauguration of Donald Trump, and he's president 47. But yeah, so if you want to go and sign up for $47, it will go back up to $97 in a few weeks. And that'll give you access to, I'm putting together videos kind of like Railscast was, or Go Rails, or Drifting Ruby. My focus is going to be, essentially, I'm going to say, here's my project, and then you're going to get a video of me working on the project every week. And it might be interspersed with, and this is something that I fixed on top end devs, right? So if I get Elasticsearch working for the search, for example, I might work that in. The first app I'm building is actually to help track bills through the Utah legislature. And so it's going to be hitting their APIs and working around the gaping holes in their APIs, because they have gaping holes in their APIs. So there may be some screen scraping and things like that to get all the data in. And then, putting together the alerts and stuff like that. So, you get a notice that says, hey, your bill went to committee, or, your bill had its second reading. And so if it has a third reading and passes, then it passes, and just kind of working through all that stuff, and then helping people connect with their legislators. Because I feel like if we have more people involved in the legislative process and talking to their legislators, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, I think we generally get better legislation. Because I think most of the things when we're talking about roads and schools and things like that, we generally agree on what we want, whether you're right or left. And so what I want is moms and dads talking to the legislators and saying, you're pushing this education bill, but that's not what we want, or things like that. So that's what I'm going to be working through, and just showing people how to do that. It's probably going to have some premium features too that involve AI and doing bill summaries for AI. I'm already doing this for another project. And so, you're going to get kind of a wide breadth of things out of this. Also creating groups so people can discuss bills together. I want to give organizations an option for putting together their slate of bills and where they stand on it, and give them some way of posting that on their websites. So those are kind of the features that I'm going to be putting in. So, embeddable stuff. So anyway, if you're looking to learn any of those things, then you want to sign up for that. We're also doing the meetups, and we'll be going through some of the technologies maybe a little more in depth. So where in the videos I'll be showing you, I'm building this feature using Turbo. I may go through, hey, here are all the features that Turbo offers in this way, or Kamal, or I've had people ask me for all kinds of stuff. If you connect with me on LinkedIn too, I'll actually get on a call with you and ask you what you want to learn. So anyway, I've been way more long-winded on that than I want. But yeah, so that's all going to be coming out through rubygeniuses.com. So hopefully that's in the wheelhouse of things you want. But yeah, we're going to be doing meetups and tutorials and screencasts and courses and the whole 9 yards. And you get access to all of that through the membership. So anyway, David, what are your picks?
Yes. So I have a coworker actually that I work side by side with that's publishing a book soon, and it's called Rails Scales. He actually gives more talks about scaling Rails than I do, but Christian Palantis is his the author's name, book name, Rails Scales. I'm actually very interested in to see what it looks like, and I can't wait to get myself a copy. I hope I get myself a free copy, but yeah.
Become a technical reviewer. They give those out for free.
Well, I mean, he works with me, and he's I'll tell him I gave him a shout out.
There you go.
There you go. What else? I actually have one other coworker that he wrote an article on AWS about scaling Zendesk. And if you do a search for, and the guy's name's Anatoly, AWS Zendesk Performance. So Anatoly, AWS Zendesk Performance, you will find his article in Google. And he talks about some of the things that we've been doing much more on the infrastructure side. He's much more of an infrastructure than a Ruby guy, but I work side by side with that guy. He's absolutely brilliant. Also, if anybody's hiring product manager or managers in general, I know several that got laid off. So feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, because I feel like there's some good people out there that I know that I'd love to connect to other people. And lastly, you guys probably don't know Zwift, but Zwift is essentially an interactive game that you connect to a bicycle trainer. And I use it. I absolutely love it. Every night, I do races sometimes, and the last few nights I've been doing races. I am not a racer. I am not that fast, but at the end of the day, I'll still go in and do the races. And I think the category D's, I'm top. I'm the best of the worst category.
Oh, there you go.
So as soon as I get moved to the next category, I'll get destroyed.
Yeah, I got a membership to Zwift when I bought my bike trainer, because I have a Wahoo trainer.
Yep.
And
kicker or the is it the bike? Okay, I got the kicker bike.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've only used it once or twice. In fact, I think it expired. But yeah, it's cool because it's almost like, well, I guess it's not almost like, but it's kind of fun to just ride your bike, and yeah.
If you're
harder up the hills and all that stuff, and
exactly, and then you're in Utah, so you suffer from the coldness, and you don't want to be biking in 20 degrees.
Oh yeah, I don't train outside. I'm training for a triathlon now. This year, I want to do either an Ironman or half Ironman. I haven't decided.
I'd do that with you, but I think my knees would say no on the running. In fact, I got an MRI scheduled for next week for my shoulder. So man, I'm breaking down.
Yeah.
And
I watched my dad fall apart, and I feel like I need to keep moving, so I don't. So
the last day, I was going to give this my last thing to saying "Go Bills" because I'm hoping for the Super Bowl, but I still say "Go Bills" because I love them.
Okay, so have you decided if you're rooting for the Eagles or the Chiefs?
have I decided whether I'm watching the Super Bowl?
Fair enough.
I don't hate the Chiefs, but at the same time, I got to root for the Eagles just because they've. I don't want the Chiefs to win 3 times in a row. Like, they're not bad. They're not like the Patriots where I hated them, but still, I don't want them to win 3 times in a row. And I think that their fan base understands that too.
Yeah, I like both teams, so I'm not sure which way I'm swinging yet. But
Saquon.
All right, good deal. What was that?
Saquon was amazing this year.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream, but thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And until next time, folks, Max out.